Hey, good morning, everybody. Today is Wednesday, May 6th. I feel like I'm in some kind of crazy show. Um, but anyway, sorry I didn't finish yesterday, chapter 11. But just long day, different things going on. And thank you again to those parents and students that are reaching out to me for help and questions. Um, a lot of you guys are missing out on your Google Meets, 50 points. But let's go ahead and finish chapter 11. And again, I have to read like this because my contacts are just bugging me, even with my allergy medicine. So maybe I need to change allergy medicine. All right, so here we go. We're going to finish the chapter that I started yesterday. Going back, I'll start with the last chapter we left off on. He wasn't bleeding, that was good, but his cheek was red and suspected that he'd gained a pretty respectable bump on his head by the morning. He parted his hair at the sight of the pain and tried to take a look in the mirror, but he couldn't really see. He was reminded again, though, of the stiffness and pain on his in his fingers. He took a look at his right hand, turning it and flexing the finger. The discomfort was freshly familiar, jolting his memory. He'd been writing again. He could vaguely recall, but what? He had no idea. Okay, there's another break, so it tells me that something's going to happen again. Well, the story. So he had finished the first notebook, so this is a flashback. He had finished the first notebook and continued into the second, almost filling that too. It was, he thought, an extraordinary amount of words to have written in one night, even if he had been just copying them from a book. To have also composed them from scratch and again written them out in a neat, compact hand without a single correction in that time defied belief. So he just was writing and writing and writing and writing and writing in these short, compact words because he's got to fit them all on the page, and there were no mistakes. He was saying, that's incredible. The pages rustled and flapped in his shaking hands as he flicked through them. He felt panicked and short of breath. What was happening to him? Where were they coming from, all these words? He put the books down, paced, so he walked around the room for a while, his mind full of fast-moving nothingness. After some minutes, he got his thoughts to settle. Then he braced himself and sat down to read. The thing that scared him most was not that this story was more brilliant than the last, though even he could see that it was, nor that it seemed even only faintly familiar to him, even though he had apparently been the one to write it, nor even that the content of the story was so dark and twisted. He's talking about the story that he wrote last night. What worried him was a single word in the pen, pen, penultimate. I had to look that word up, which it's an adjective and it's one in a series. So it's not the last one. So like book one, book two, book three. So again, nor even that the content of the story was so dark and twisted. What worried him was a single word on the penultimate page. Quotidian. Quotidian. I actually had to look that one up too, which means happens every night. I know I looked it up yesterday, so it made sense yesterday. He had no idea what it meant, what quotidian meant. He had never heard it before, much less ever used it. We're going to see how he uses it later. It is an adjective, so it's used to describe something. What is even a real, is it even a real word? He had no idea, but he had written it, apparently, or at least his hand had held the pen that had written it. His steady hand. Sadie's like, what are you doing? Not that this one was quivering before him now. So another break. So now the scene changes. Mary wasn't used to having customers waiting outside the library door for her to open up in the morning. You're keen, she said, but James rushed by her without a word, heading straight for the reference section. Suit yourself, she muttered. Quotidian really was a word. What's more, it was a word he had used perfectly correctly in a short work of fiction that, by any reasonable judgment, it was fair to say he was in no way capable of having written. Have you filled out your form then? Said the girl when he went unsteadily over to the desk. No, remember she gave him the form to fill out for his library card? No, he fumbled in his pocket and found the form, looked at it with a dazed puzzlement. Yes, I have. He indeed filled in the application forms. It was just that he had no memory of doing it. So he handed him over, then his driver's license and a letter from the electric company. He had to show proof of where he lived. So the electric company had his address on it. The girl nodded, filled in a form of her own, and told him a little brusquely that he'd have his card in a few days. James did not respond. He looked confused, a little lost. The girl was still trying to weigh whether to ask him what was wrong or tell him to leave when a short, stout man wearing a ratty jacket and a flap cap and in his 60s came in. He looked at James in wide eyes, overacting surprise. Blimey, Mary, two people in here at once? Haven't seen that since the 50s. I hope they'll be giving you some extra staff to cope. He was being sarcastic because usually it sounds like it's him and Mary in the library. Now there's two people and Mary. Morning, George, said the girl, smiling and handing him a copy of the Financial Times. Enjoy your crossword. He shuffled off toward one of the tables. James hadn't moved. Was there anything else? She asked him. Sorry, I didn't sleep too well last night. Look, this is going to sound crazy, but he was looking to one side of her, avoiding meeting her eyes. One of the fingers was tapping erratically on top of the pair of notebooks he had put down on her desk. The last time she'd seen anyone so nervous in her company, the man in question had proposed marriage without success. Look, do you? He shook his head as if trying to rattle his thoughts into some sort of order. Do you know how I could find out about who you used to live in my house? In the writer's house? How could I find out who the writer was? Well, I suppose. French fella, said George, without looking up from his crossword puzzle. I think French. Foreign, anyway. Before my time here. But I heard all about him. Young chap, like a young man. Locked himself away in that place. Scribbling away. Wrote 2 books. Then went excuse me, then went mad, meaning he went crazy. 2 books, then went mad. James's face crumpled. Mad? Well, he killed himself anyway. Got to be a bit mad to do that, haven't you? Funny lot, those arty, crafty types, aren't they? Highly strung. Why'd you ask, though? But James was already halfway out the door. Another break. Mary thought more than twice about whether to go to the house. She had the address from James's application form, but she figured that he'd probably be back once he realized that he'd left his notebook behind. His notebooks, plural, behind. She also realized she could quite easily mail the books back to him if that were her real concern. But after 2 weeks, she still had it. She'd read them in the meantime. though several times over. She'd meant just to take a glance, kidding herself that she was checking it in case James had written the phone number inside somewhere. But of course, once she'd read the beginning, she couldn't stop herself. She found out who the writer's house had belonged to as well. She'd asked a few of her regulars until a half remembered title gave her enough of a lead to find his name. Then, out of interest, she tracked down copies of both his novels in other branches and had them transferred over to her library. When she read them, she recognized the style at once. The second book to arrive had been published after his death. It was a dark and disturbing story, but it was about the author page that finally shocked her into action. She drove to the house straight after work. There was no answer to her knock, but the door wasn't locked when she tried it. About the author. So usually there's a page in the book, sometimes in the front, sometimes in the back. If it's a hardcover book, sometimes the paper folds over and it's in the front cover. Another break. She was sure as soon as she saw him that James was dead. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the scene before her, shocked into a strange numbness. It was horrible, but fascinating. Perhaps because of the chaos around it, it was the neat pile of notebooks that held her attention. There was a reassuring normalness to them, order and familiarity. They were the same kind of books Mary had used at school. They looked like something from real life. So she focused on the books and chose not to dwell on any of the rest of it for now. In a daze, she shuffled over to the table and picked up the books. They were numbered on their covers from 3 to 6. That means number 1 is missing and number 2 is missing. As a librarian and as a respecter of the correct order of things, she dutifully opened up 3 and, on impulse, began to read. Remember, he left 2 notebooks at the library, and she read those. Another break. By the time she had finished book 6, it was the early hours of the morning. She slept briefly before she continued to read, slowly finding some order in the rest of James's final writings. On loose sheets of paper, the backs of envelopes, paper towels, and elsewhere. James's handwriting had deteriorated, which means gone down in quality, because remember she had said that the words, or not she, but the book said that his words were compacted and neat and organized and perfect and no mistakes. Well, now the writing is going downhill. James's handwriting had deteriorated as he went along, and this helped her to find the correct order and told her at once that the writing on the table itself, still reasonably legible, preceded the less controlled writing on the walls and the wild scrawl on James's own left arm. So this guy was writing on anything and everything, including his walls in the house and his arm. She had expected an ending. She had, in fact, relied upon it. She had to steel herself to read. With difficulty, the last words trailed over James's pale, dead skin. And had known she could have stopped long ago, she should not have even have started. But the writing, the beautiful, elegant, seductive sentences had compelled her to go on. Now that she had run out, she felt sick twice over. Excuse me. Once for gorging herself and once for still feeling unsatisfied. There had to be an ending. So if you recall, James, when he picked up that cheap book at the beginning, he read the ending, but he wasn't satisfied. That's what started all of this, that he wanted to rewrite the ending. Now, Mary is saying, there's no ending. She searched the room frantically for some other, previously overlooked scrap of paper that might contain it. checked every surface, ran through the rest of the house in case it might have set down in some other room. At last she forced to conclude that there simply was no ending. James had written himself to death, but whatever madness had forced him to do so had kept him from sleeping or eating for days, had drained all those words and his life from him, and still not completed its task. Back in the kitchen, dawn's light breaking through the window, Mary sank exhausted to the floor. She glanced resentfully at James's body sprawled across the tabletop, and then, appalled at this reaction, shook herself into recognizing the awfulness of what she had done. What had she been thinking? Would she go now, return to town, and telephone the police? Or should she call for an ambulance? She wasn't sure, but she would go and belatedly do what she needed. She couldn't believe how the writing had gripped her, nor how overwhelmingly she had felt the need for an ending to the story. Well, there could never be one now, so there was no point thinking about it. Unless, dun dun dun, look, unless, dun dun dun, ellipsis. A thought occurred to her. She had a notebook and a pen in her pocket, and there was a larger notepad in the car if she needed it. She was already on to the second page of the notebook, her writing dense and neat and flowing quickly. Sound familiar? James and the world fell away, and all of that was left were words. So here's the italics writing, so I know I'm at the end. Sadie's trying to get comfortable. She had a rough day at daycare yesterday. Frances Crane sits still for a moment. She is leaning forward, propped up on one arm. Her head is bowed. She looks drained, as if the telling of her story had sapped all the energy from her, wiped away her playful smile. Are you okay? Says Jack. Frances looks up at him. Yes, she says hesitantly. Yes, thank you. She throws him a cursory smile, which is kind of like a fake smile. A weak little thing that dies in a second.